series going across the world, exploring the Jewish communities. And we've spoken about 25 countries. Now, today we're going to start a series on the country of Turkey over here. Now, this is going to be about probably a 3-part series at least, because there's so much to cover. So today the plan is to speak about pre-19th century, like from just a few of the highlights. Well, really, we can't do so much justice because there's so much to talk about. But Turkey, in its olden day, was a bastion of Torah learning. There was huge Torah, especially during the 1700s, 1800s, even 1600s. So we're going to speak about the country itself, a bit of the history about it, a lot about the Rabbonim, maybe a bit about the synagogues. So very, very interesting. One of the largest populations, we could say, in of itself. I think Turkey itself currently has about 14,000 people as of 2025, but we're going to speak more about that probably in the later parts of the series of this. Now, just as an introduction, there's been Jewish communities in Anatolia since the beginning of the Common Era over there. So Turkey has had a Jewish presence for more than 2,000 years, without a doubt. And Anatolia's Jewish population before the Ottoman times primarily consisted, let's say, of Greek-speaking, let's say, Romaniote Jews, with a handful of dispersed, I think, some people from, you could say, from Karaite communities also. In the late 15th century and early 16th century, many Sephardic Jews, especially from Spain, from Portugal, from southern Italy, they were expelled by the Alhambra decree there was, and they would found refuge in the Ottoman Empire, including the regions now part of Turkey. This influx will end up playing like a huge role in shaping the identity of the Ottoman Jewish community. Now, by the end of the 16th century, the Jewish population in the Ottoman Empire was double. It was about 150,000 people. So we're talking a serious amount of Jews. That of Jews in Poland and Ukraine, for example, was 75,000. So it was possibly one of the largest communities in the world. Now, Turkey, obviously, the Jewish community itself, very large, diverse, vibrant, and really forms, let's say, the core of Ottoman Jewry, especially until the First World War. We're going to speak more about the 18 and 1900s, possibly in the next couple of classes. And that's something to talk about without a doubt. Obviously, Ladino is the main language in of itself. And let's explore a bit within regards to the prehistory. Let's go back a bit to the Roman and Byzantine rule time period. Now, according to the Torah, Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. This was a mountain in eastern Anatolia, in the Armenian highlands near the present-day borders of Turkey, Armenia and Iran. In the 1st century AD, there was a famous Jewish historian named Josephus, who we've spoken about before. He would cite records confirming the presence of diaspora Jews in Lydia and an area called Phrygia. I think by the late 3rd century BC, a community established through the relocation of 2,000 families by the Seleucid king Antiochus III, that was at that point in time. And Josephus notes Jewish origins from many cities in Anatolia, for example, and much of these sourcings are very much chronicled over. I think descendants were in Sardis and other centers. They will gain civic privileges by the late Republican Rome. Very interesting enough. So that's and the size of the Jewish community, let's say, was not greatly affected by attempts of the Byzantine emperors to force, let's say, people into Christianity, let's just say, at that point in time. So that's a whole topic onto itself. I think Jews arrived in Anatolia between the 6th century BCE and 133 BCE when the Romans arrived. And they were Romaniote Jews and first settled in Lydia and in Phrygia, respectively, over there. So very interesting. I think come up 2020, way back, a 7th century synagogue was uncovered in Side, respectively, over there. Now we're going to speak a bit more about the Ottoman era, so we're going to really concentrate more post 14th century till possibly right at the beginning of the 19th century. I'm just going to say a blessing. I've got a coffee over here. Okay. The first synagogue linked to Ottoman rule was Etz Chaim, also known as the Tree of Life, in Bursa, in Turkey, which passed to Ottoman authority, come at the year 1324. The synagogue, I think, is actually still in use, although I think the modern Jewish population of Bursa is only about 140 people. Now, the status of the Jewish people in Ottoman Empire often hinged on the whims of the Sultan. So, for example, I think Murad III ordered that the attitude of all non-Muslims should be one of humility and abjection, and they should not, let's say, live near mosques or tall buildings, or they're not allowed to, in those times, have slaves also. But other, I think, let's say, the sultans were more moderate and were more flexible on that. Now, looking at major events that actually take place in Turkey at that point in time, the first major, I think, event in Jewish history was under Turkish rule. It took place after the empire gained control over Constantinople. I think it was after Mehmed the Conqueror's conquest of Constantinople. He found the city in a state of disarray. After suffering, there were many sieges. There was a devastating sack, let's say, of the Constantinople by the Crusaders in 1204, and the arrival of the Black Death pandemic in 1347. The city was much less as great as it previously was. And Mehmed really wanted the city as his new capital, so he decreed its rebuilding over there at that point in time. So we're talking now, we're going more about 700-800 years ago. In order, let's say, to revivify Constantinople, he ordered Muslims, Christians and Jewish people from all over his empire to be resettled in a new capital. I think months of the empire's Romanite Jews from the Balkans and Anatolia were consecrated, as well concentrated in Constantinople, and it will make up about 10% of the city's population. At the same time, the forced resettlement, though not intended as an anti-Jewish measure, was perceived as expulsion of Jews. It was a form of expulsion over there. And the Romaniotes would be the most influential community in the empire for a few decades, and that will be lost when there was a wave of Sephardic immigrants who would come in from Spain, I believe, later on. Now, the number of Romaniotes were bolstered by small pockets of Ashkenazic Jewish people that immigrated to the Ottoman Empire between 1421 to 1453. And among them was a famous Rabbi Yitzhak Sarfati, who was actually a German-born Jewish person of French descent. He would later on go on to become the chief rabbi of Edirne and will write a letter inviting European Jewry to settle in the Ottoman Empire, in which he stated, "Turkey is a land wherein nothing is lacking," and asking, "Is it not better for you to live under Muslims than under Christians?" So that's a famous, phrase that's been used all throughout Jewish history by many, many people. Now, I think the greatest influx of Jewish people in Anatolia, in Ayelet and the Ottoman Empire occurred during the reign of Mehmed the Conqueror's successor, Bayezid II. And this was between the years 1481 till 1512. I think there was expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which we've spoken about on various occasions before, but the Kingdom of Portugal, the Kingdom of Naples and the Kingdom of Sicily. The Sultan issued a formal invitation, and refugees started arriving in empire in huge numbers. I think a very key moment actually would take place in 1492. Obviously, more than 40,000 Spanish Jews fled Spain Inquisition at that point in time. And the greatest influx of Jews into Anatolia, Yelet, and the Ottoman Empire occurred during the reign of Mehmed, the Conqueror's successor. Yeah, as I said before, Bayezid II. At that point, Constantinople's population was just about 70,000 people due to various sieges of the city during the Crusades and the Black Death. So this historical event was also significant for the repopulation of the city. Many of these Spanish Jews also settled in Constantinople. They would also go to Greece, in Saloniki also. And the Jews, let's say, satisfied various needs in the Ottoman Empire. The Muslim Turks were largely uninterested in business enterprises and accordingly left commercial occupations to, let's say, the members of minority religions. They also distrusted, at that point in time, the Christian subjects, whose countries had only recently been conquered by the Ottomans, and therefore it was natural to prefer Jewish subjects to which consideration did not apply over there. And now, especially these Spanish Jewish people were allowed to settle in more wealthier cities of the empire, especially in Romania. I think European provinces such as in Constantinople, Sarajevo, Saloniki, Adrianople, Nicopolis, also western and northern Anatolia. There was also other areas like Bursa, Aydin, Tokat, Tyre, Manisa, Amasya, but also in the Mediterranean coastal areas. Also people go to Jerusalem, Tzfat, Damascus, Egypt. Izmir was not settled by Spanish Jews, let's say, until at a later stage. That's something you have to point out. Now, the Jewish population in Jerusalem increased from 70 families, I believe, in 1488 to 1500, I think, at the beginning of the 16th century. That was very, very interesting. And so I think, especially in Tzfat, increased from a few hundred families and would actually surpass Jerusalem in numbers. Damascus had a congregation of 500 families, but Constantinople had a Jewish community of 30,000 individuals, 44 synagogues, and Bayezid allowed the Jews to live on the banks of the Golden Horn. Egypt, Ayelet, especially Cairo, received a large number of Jews who soon outnumbered the Mustarbi Jews. Gradually, the chief center of the Sephardic Jews became in Saloniki, where the Spanish Jews soon outnumbered, let's say, the co-religionists of other nationalities, and at one time the original native inhabitants. Very interesting. So anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of Turkey, the Jewish community over there, the early years of it. So please subscribe to the channel if you're new to the channel over here, and join our community. And please hit the subscribe button over here, friends. We're exploring about the great countries of yesteryear over here. And then let's say the status of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire may have been often exaggerated, according to some people. It's undeniable they enjoyed tolerance at that stage in time. Under the millet system, they were organized as a community on the basis of religion, alongside with other millets, I think, at that point in time. In the framework of the millets, they had a considerable amount of administrative autonomy, and they would have the Chacham Bashi, which we're going to speak about in due course, the chief rabbi. There were no restrictions in the professions Jewish people could practice, let's say analogous to the common Western Christian countries, and there were restrictions in areas Jews could live or work, but such restrictions were imposed on subjects, Ottoman subjects, of other religions also, we have to point out. Now, like all non-Muslims, Jewish people had to pay a harak, a head tax, and they faced other restrictions, clothing, horse riding, army service, but they could occasionally be waived or circumvented. Jewish people who reached high positions in Ottoman court and administration include Mehmed the Conqueror's Minister of Finance, Hakim Yakub Passa, his Portuguese physician, I think Moses Hamon, Murad II's physician, someone named Isaac Passa, and another famous person, Abraham de Castro, who was a master of mint in Egypt. Very interesting enough. Now, the classical Ottoman period was really between 1300 to 1600. The Jews, together with most of the communities of the empire, enjoyed certain level of prosperity. If we make a comparison with other people from Ottoman subjects, let's say, they were a greater power in commerce, especially, and in trade, and they were very diplomatic. They held very, very prestigious positions in office. In the 16th century, especially, the Jewish people were prominent under millets. The apogee, let's say, of Jewish influence could arguably be by the appointment, we see, of Joseph Nassi to Sanjak Bey, the governor at that point in time, usually only bestowed upon Muslims of Naxos. Also in the first half of the 17th century, the Jews were distinct in winning tax farms. We have to point out also very, very interesting upside. And another key figure, let's say, at that point in time is the Haim Gerber also. There were, though, friction will actually arise between Jewish people and Turkish, but I think it was less common than in Arab territories over there. Some examples, I think, during the reign of, I think it was Murad IV, if I'm not mistaken, in the years 1623 to 1640, the Jews of Jerusalem were persecuted by an Arab who had purchased the governorship of the city from the governor of the province. Now, I think under Mehmed IV, if I'm not mistaken, between 1649 to 1687, and the 1660, let's say, destruction of Tzfat would occur. There was additional issues. It was Jewish ethnic divisions over there at that point in time. For example, They came to the Ottoman Empire from many different countries. They brought with them their own customs and opinions, which they really clung to and over there. And they would have to form separate congregations. Now, another tremendous terribleness that actually occurred at that point in time, which we're going to speak about in maybe the next 15 to 20 minutes, was that the famous Shabtai Tzvi claimed to be the Messiah. Obviously, he was a heretic, he was a false Messiah. He was eventually caught by the Ottoman authorities. And hold on a minute, let me just fix this. Anyone tuning live at the moment, we're doing a live video over here of the history of the Turkey, the Jewish community in Turkey. So please, everyone, subscribe to our channel now if you are new to the channel. Over here, we're a community here. We're trying to get to 8,000 subscribers. So please, friends, everyone, please subscribe and join our channel. Okay, so we're talking about the Shabtai Tzvi that actually occurred at that point in time. He was caught by the Ottoman authorities and was given the choice between death and conversion, and he opted for the latter. His remaining disciples will end up converting to Islam, and the descendants, I think, are today known as the Donmeh. So obviously this was devastating at that point in time and really caused a lot of damage for Israel. And it was a terrible time here. Now, one thing that would affect Turkey itself was the destruction of Tzfat in 1660. What happened over there? It occurred during the Druze power struggle in Mount Lebanon at the time of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed IV, I believe. The towns of Tzfat nearby Tiberias, with substantial Jewish communities, were destroyed in turmoil. A small Jewish community surviving in Tzfat, but Tiberias, a Jewish town at the time, losing almost its entire Jewish population. I think total population. Only a few of the former residents of Tzfat returned to the town after destruction. Someone named Gershon Sholem considered 1662 reports about the destruction of Tzfat maybe was slightly exaggerated. The community, however, recovered within several years, whereas Tiberias was in destruction for, I think, decades afterwards, if I'm not mistaken. But that's another topic itself we're going to maybe speak about at a later stage in time. Now, a key Ottoman person, I think, that lived in Turkey was Joseph Nasi, who I mentioned before. He lived between 1524 to 1579. He was known in Portuguese as João Miques. He was a Portuguese Sephardi diplomat and an administrator, member of the House of Mendes and House of Benevisti. Also, we're going to speak about them. He was a nephew of the famous Dona Gracia Mendes Nasti and an influential figure, let's just say, in the Ottoman Empire during the rules of both the Sultan Suleiman I and his son, the Selim II. He was a great benefactor of the Jewish people also. We have to point out, he actually passed away in Constantinople in Ottoman Empire in 1579. He was a statesman, he was a diplomat, he was a very influential figure in Ottoman Empire politics, let's say. And he had the title of Lord of Tiberias and the Duke of Naxos also. And he was also related to Gracia Mendes Nasi. I think that was his aunt, and Reina Anna Nasi was his cousin, also respectively. But he was a friend of Maximilian, the nephew of Habsburg, King Charles I of Spain also. And he had many prominent. He would move later on in his life. He was in the University of Leuven. He went to France later on, and later to Venice. And then he left for the Ottoman realm in 1554. Very interesting enough. So and another key figure at that point in time of Ottoman Jewish and very much in parts of Turkey, I think, was Abraham de Castro. I think he passed away in 1560. He was an Ottoman Jewish financialist who would serve as the head of the Mint of Ottoman Sultan Selim I and played a very active role in the Cairo Purim, respectively, over there. Seemingly, he was probably born in Spain. I think he was born in Spain. I'm not too sure when exactly it was. It was the date itself, I'm not sure. We know the Spanish Inquisition occurred in 1492. So the date he was actually born itself, per se, I'm not 100% sure on. But he would pass away in Jerusalem in 1560. So, that's very, very interesting. He was another key figure. Okay, so let's go back to the country Turkey, about the Jewish history over there. I believe we were talking about the Jewish ethnic divisions that would actually take place at that point in time, and the upheavals of Shabtai Tzvi that would tremendously affect the Turkish Jewish community over there at a huge amount. But we're going to speak about that on due course. Let's explore about some more key figures of them at that point in time. I think that, just to add on, the history of the Jews in Turkey, especially in the 18th century, is and especially in the earlier part of the 19th century, is principally a chronicle of decline in influence and power at that stage in time, where they would lose influential positions in trade, mainly to Greeks, who were, let's say, able to capitalize at that point in time on their religio-cultural ties with the West and their trading diaspora. An exception, I think, was someone named Daniel de Fonseca, who was a chief court physician and played a critical political role at that point in time. And he's actually mentioned by Voltaire, who speaks of him as an acquaintance whom he esteemed highly. Now, it's actually interesting. Fonseca was involved in negotiations with, I think, Charles VII of Sweden. So who was he? He lived between 1672 to 1740. He was a Portuguese Marrano Jew. He was a court physician. He was an advisor to notable European rulers. Now, he used his influence, let's say, to secure better treatment of Jewish communities throughout Europe over there. Let's speak about, yes, that's very, very interesting. So he's a key figure over there at that point in time. So let's continue a bit. Before we go more into, we're going to speak more about we're going to go back a bit to the previous point in times. And it's Ottoman Jews, let's just say, would later on have held a variety of views in the Ottoman Empire, from loyal Ottomanism to Zionism. And for example, someone named Emmanuel Carasso, for example, was a founding member of Young Turks, who believed that the Jews of the empire should be Turks first and Jews second, for example, over there. Obviously, we don't like to go about that way at that point in time. And we're going to learn more about that, I think, in the second part of the series within regards to that. Let's go back a bit within regards to some of the descriptions of the famous Rabbi Yitzhak Sarfati. We're going to go back a little bit more, just using an article from Aish. One time, Rabbi Yitzhak Sarfati wrote a famous letter to his fellow Jews saying, "I assure you, Turkey is a country of abundance where, if you wish, you will find rest." Especially we saw from the 14th century and onwards, many European Jews that were expelled from their homelands would migrate to Turkey, especially even from Hungary. I think they would come in 1360, and from France in 1394, and obviously from Sicily and Salonika. And I think in 1470, Jews expelled from Bavaria by Ludwig V, I think, found refuge in the Ottoman Empire. And we talk about the tens of thousands that will come from Spain, especially at the time of the Spanish Inquisition. I think in 1492, Sultan Bayezid II ordered the governors of the provinces of Ottoman Empire not to refuse the Jews entry or cause them difficulties, but to receive them cordially. I think approximately 100,000 Jewish people fled Spain under the Alhambra decree, as we mentioned about before. And 60,000 Jews arrived in 1492. And it's actually interesting. The Sultan said that the Catholic monarch Ferdinand was wrongly considered wise, since he impoverished Spain by expelling the Jews and enriched Turkey. And we know that between the 15th and 16th century, more Jews would arrive in Turkey from Italy, Portugal, and establish thriving communities there, especially in Istanbul and in Salonika also. And more Jews would arrive from Spain, would last for many decades, I believe. Some came directly, others will come after long journeys, especially by way of Italy. And due to large influx, the original group of Greek-speaking Romaniote Jews was eventually absorbed by the Sephardic community. And very, very interesting. I think in 1477, Jewish households in Istanbul numbered as many as 1,647, or 11% of the total. Half a century later, that number had quadrupled. Amazingly, there were 2,645 Jewish households in Saloniki, more than half of the city's population. This is, I think, incredible, because 30 years earlier, there were no Jews in the large Balkan port city from 16th century onwards. I think for 200 years, following the expulsion from Spain, this prosperity and creativity of the Ottoman Jews rivaled that of the Golden Age of Spain. Jews played vital roles in medicine, innovation, government and finance. I think, for example, most of the Sultan's court physicians were Jewish people. That include the famous Hakim Yaakov, Joseph Hamon, and also Moshe Hamon. Obviously, we mentioned about Daniel Fonseca before. Another famous man, Gabriel Bornio Tiora, also very interesting. And immigrating Jewish people at that point in time brought with them new techniques of navigation, weapons production, printing press, for example, was one of the most significant innovations Jewish people brought to the Ottoman Empire. I think in 1493, 1 year after the expulsions of Spain, two people, Rabbi David Nachmias and Rabbi Samuel Ibn Nachmias, established the first Hebrew printing press in Istanbul. I believe they were rabbis, I think. However, Turkish authorities forbade them to use Arabic alphabet so that Turkish scribes and calligraphers would not be deprived of work. Let's talk about the economic sphere itself. Jewish people contributed, was hugely significant. Jews also had vital roles in tax administration and empire's finances and textile industries and banking in of itself, respectively. Let's talk about some of the rabbis at that point in time. Turkey, as I said before, was a bastion area, especially during the 17th century and 16th century, and also 18th century. I think, for example, the famous Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived between 1418 to 1575, it was known as one of the great Sephardic halachic authorities, fled Spain during the expulsion and moved to Turkey, to Constantinople. He compiled most of his monumental Beit Yosef book in Adrianopole before he moved to Tzfat, interesting enough. Another great rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, who I think passed away in 1576, lived in Turkey and would later on move to Tzfat also. He was the composer of the famous song Lecha Dodi, which all people on the Kabbalah Shabbat across the Jewish world will sing on Shabbat, respectively, on Kabbalah Shabbat. Now, another key rabbi who we'll speak about in a minute was Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi. He lived between 1450 to 1525. He would serve as a chief rabbi of Turkey for 30 years. He was famous for the book called the Ra'am, which elucidates, let's say, Rashi's explanations of the Torah. Another key rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Rosenus, we're going to speak about them soon. He lived between 1657 to 1727. He was a chief rabbi in Istanbul and the author of a commentary on the Ramban, known as the Mishnah Lemelech, a really great book. His student was Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, who would begin to write the widely studied Ladina commentary, Mamluez, in the Torah, which we're going to speak about later. Obviously, he passed away 2 years after initiating the work was finished. Now, Turkey was significant, especially in the 1500s, because they would actually, I think Turkey itself would capture Eretz Israel, the Holy Land itself. I think in 1516 to 17, Selim I conquered Syria and Israel. With that began a special relationship between the Turkish communities and the communities of Israel. Turkish Jews would often emigrate to Israel, and rabbis from Israel relocated and served as rabbis for the communities in Turkey. So there was a relationship at that point in time. With the, let's say, the conquering of Israel, Turkish interest in Israel increased. There was Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the greatest sultans, made a great mark in history when he rebuilt the walls around the old city of Jerusalem that stand to our very day over there. It's interesting, in 1558, Sultan Solomon granted a Jewish woman, some of the name, Donna Gracia Mendez Nasi, a long-term lease on the Tiberias region in Israel. This area was largely desolate, and Donna Gracia committed to giving, let's say, a large amount of yearly tax revenues from this area to the Sultan, respectively, over here. Now, anyone that's tuning in to our video, subscribe to the channel now. Please, we do fantastic videos here, so please join our community and subscribe. We are recording over here the history, early years of Turkey, pre-1800s. Over here, it's a very, very special edition. It'll be about possibly a 3 or 4 part series over here on Turkey. So very, very special over here. Okay, so let's speak about Donna Gracia Mendez Nasi. She was one of the wealthiest and most influential Jewish women of the Renaissance Europe. She married into an eminent international banking family known as the House of Mendez. She was aunt and mother-in-law and business partner of Don Yosef Nasi, who became, let's say, a prominent figure of the Ottoman Empire as the Duke of Naxos. And Don Yosef actually was responsible for much of the delicate maneuvering of Turkey's declaration of war against Venice in 1571, and let's say the resultant conquest of Cyprus, which I think still plays a role in current day international politics. What's interesting, Donna Gracia was also renowned for concern for Jews worldwide and her wisdom and courage, let's just say, in helping them. What's interesting, she even developed an escape network that saved hundreds of conversos. Conversos is forcibly converted Jews from terrors of the Inquisition. Donna Gracia, I think, intended to make Tiberias a major, let's say, Jewish settlement of trade and learning. She also aided Jewish people in Tzfat, and in less than 100 years, I believe the population of Tzfat grew from 300 families to 10,000 people, making it most Jewishly populated city in Israel at the time, partly thanks to her. After the passing of Donna Gracia and Don Yosef Nassi, other Jewish leaders were influential in the Turkish court. A Portuguese Morano, someone named Alua Mendes, was named the Duke of Mytilene in return for his diplomatic services to the Sultan. Solomon ben Nathan Ashkenazi arranged the first diplomatic ties with the British Empire. Now Turkish Jews of 16th and 17th centuries were a very prosperous Jewish group in the world, let's say, and the Jewish community thrived, let's say, in this really great, more free atmosphere in itself, and very relaxed atmosphere. Let's go back again to the whole topic of the Shabtai Tzvi, all the destruction really he did. In the 17th century, a person, let's say, rose of influence would obviously change Jewish communities in Turkey, and in a very, very damaging way, let's just say in itself. Shabtai Tzvi, he was born in 1626 in Smyrna in Turkey, on the 9th of Av, which is seen as a very sad day on the Jewish calendar. And according to Jewish law, so in of itself. And they say it's a day on which, according to Jewish law, Messiah was born. So his family, I think, Romaniotes, if I'm not mistaken. His characteristic itself was very charismatic. He was given the title of a Chacham initially, a wise man, and by the age of 20, that was. And he was, let's just say, more pronounced than his scholarship. But he had strange behavior and extreme emotions, let's just say, which would range from very deep depression to overflowing ecstasies, let's just say. Some of the Smyrna Jews were strongly drawn to him, let's just say, at that point in time. They were inspired by his religious utterances. However, he always repeated, I think, his claims to have been the Messiah. Just reading this from the HaTorah website. And his utterances of ineffable name of God led the rabbis of Smyrna to expel him from Smyrna in the early 1650s. He would eventually travel to Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, and he would consult with Nathan Benjamin Levy, also known as Nathan of Gaza at that point in time. Now, Nathan claimed to be a soul healer, and we mentioned him on previous videos before. And at that point in time, and they would have a fateful meeting, and Shabtai Tzvi met with him to find, let's say, a tikkun, a rectification, and a peace for his soul. So, and as one report put it, Nathan was convinced that Shabtai Tzvi was the Moshiach at that one time, and that Nathan's urging, Shabtai revealed himself as such. Nathan professed also to be Elijah the prophet, which was obviously not true, and becoming a leading figure in, let's say, this messianic movement. Although I think the rabbis of Jerusalem denounced him and declared them both to be charlatans and frauds, the movement will actually gain momentum at that point in time. I think Shabtai Tzvi returned to Smyrna in 1665 and had a large entourage, and great homage was, I think, paid to him there. Along with Nathan of Gaza, he made announcements at that point in time declaring there was a Mashiach, and made, let's say, crazy predictions and claims of imminent miracles and redemptions that were to take place. Let's just say he had obviously many detractors. He would go on to become the leader at that point in time of the community in Smyrna. He removed the former rabbi, who was a great rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Lapapa, from his position, and he would appoint Rabbi Chaim Ben-Avissi instead. Popularity will grow, and he used his power to crush at that point in time the people that opposed him, and his fame will spread to people of all faiths and various different stories, let's just say, about various miracles and sightings were just reported over at that point in time. Obviously, he was a charlatan and a fake. It was said in North Scotland, this, quoting the History website, in North Scotland, a ship appeared with silken sails and ropes, manned by sailors that spoke Hebrew. The flag bore the inscription, the 12 tribes of Israel. Letters regarding Shabtai Tzvi received from Europe and North Africa with embellished reports about the movement and enthusiasm throughout the Jewish world at that point in time would grow. I think in Italy, Germany and the Netherlands, and Hamburg and Amsterdam, all heard about the events. In Smyrna, the Jewish community, I think of Avignon in France, even prepared to emigrate to New Kingdom in the spring of 1666. Even though Shabtai Tzvi had considerable, let's say, following in the Jewish world, much more, let's just say that even Yoshka had, that we'll call him Jesus. Most of the European rabbis who saw how Shabtai Tzvi and his followers violated Jewish law, they were not fools, let's just say, and they would warn against him. Foremost among his appointment was the famous Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, who was of Amsterdam, and I think would be, actually, if I'm not mistaken, the first chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, I think in around 1656. Eventually, Shabtai Tzvi was arrested by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and he was imprisoned in Gallipoli. Even this did not deter his followers, and many of them flocked to visit him, I think at a time when he was in jail. And a debacle came to its devastating end on September 15th. In 1666, Shabtai Tzvi was brought before the Sultan, and they gave him a choice of death or conversion to Islam. He chose to convert, and obviously shaken, let's say, to the core at his decision. Many people of the Jewish world realized, obviously, he was a charlatan and an imposter. Yet believers in his messianic claims at that point in time, I think some of them would actually remain, unfortunately. Approximately 300 families converted to Islam, and they were known, I think, as the Donme, the converts. Now, Nathan of Gaza would continue to support Shabtai Tzvi, explaining his conversion was a deep mystery and part of a Kabbalistic process towards a final redemption. He and other followers of Shabtai Tzvi continued to, let's say, adhere to this paradoxical theology and combined, let's say, at that point in time, aspects of Judaism, but a belief in Shabtai Tzvi. In the aftermath of this, like, say, debacle, fiasco, the Ottoman authorities began to regard the Jewish minority, which until then had attracted no particular, let's say, suspicion or concern, with more suspicions. Western travelers who passed through the Jewish areas of Istanbul described that it was a new reality at that point in time, which was totally different to what was described centuries before. And these Turkish Jews kept to themselves in their communities. They would become shopkeepers now, artisans, or low-level, let's say, employees at that stage in time. Now, the Donma, they followed the Shabtai Tzvi. That's another thing to talk about. But I think, the later parts of the 18th century, the status of Jews in Turkey started to improve under the Tanzimat reforms. And these reforms are part of a process, let's just say, to transform the empire at that point in time based on European models, and were intended to signify that, let's say, Ottoman Empire belongs among the European nations. As part of these reforms, there were now official recognition of Jews as separate communities and a state-appointed chief rabbi over there. That's the point in time now. Let's go and speak about some of the Chacham Bashis, the chief rabbis. Now, in today's series, as I said before, we are just speaking really about pre-1800. So we're not going to try and speak about any of the rabbis we're going to speak about now. Will really be rabbis that will be born before 1800 itself, respectively. And maybe in the next session, we'll speak more about the rabbis of the 19th century, because otherwise it's going to end up being like a 5-6 hour video, which will be too long. So a list of the chief rabbis. The first one was someone named Rabbi Moses Kapsali, between 1454 to 1495. Rabbi Elijah Mizrahi would be between 1497 to 1526. Rabbi Mordechai Komitano would be between 1526 to 1542. This, remember, of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. The Rabbi Tam ibn Yahya was with, for 2 years, till 1543. I think in 1543, Rabbi Eliyahu Benjamin Alevi would be, and between 1543 to to 1602 will be Rabbi Eliyahu ben Hayim. So if he was 60 years, they'll make him one of the longest serving chief rabbis in Jewish history. The Rabbi Yechiel Bassan between 1602 to 1625. Then a famous rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Mitrani, another rabbi we've spoken about, between 1625 to 1639. Rabbi Yom Tov ben Yaesh was between 1639 and 1642. Then for 35 years, till 1677, the chief rabbi was Rabbi Yom Tov ben Hanina ben Yakar, I believe. Then Rabbi Chaim Kamchi was between 1677 and to 1715. Rabbi Yehuda ben Ray, 1715-1717. Rabbi Samuel Levi, between 1717 and 1720. Rabbi Abraham ben Chaim Rosanes, a famous rabbi, was between 1720 to 1745. And we're going to speak more about the rabbis of later points in time. But now let's speak a bit about Rabbi Moses ben Elijah Kapsali over here. Now, anyone that's tuning live at the moment, please subscribe to the channel. We're nearing 8,000 subscribers here. We do fantastic content over here. So please, everyone, join our community. And please, welcome to everybody over here. And we're a community here. We're speaking about the great rabbis of yesteryear and exploring the history of various countries from all across the world. So so Bezrat Hashem, we keep going and we explore history. I'm very, very proud about it in of itself. So welcome to everyone that's on the channel at the moment. And welcome. And we're speaking at the moment pre-1800s at the moment of Turkey, the country Turkey, respectively, over here, on the special edition. Okay, so now let's speak about Rabbi Moses ben Elijah Kapsali. So obviously passed away in 1492. He was born in Ventian, Crete, I think in 1420. And he left his native island and he studied at various German yeshivot when he was young. He's will become the rabbi of Constantinople about in 1450. And he became prominent only during the reign of Sultan Mehmed II, who appointed him the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan thought so much of the rabbi, he assigned him as a seat, and I think connected to the Grand Mufti at that point in time, and the religious head of the Muslims, and above the patriarch of the Christians. Rabbi Kapsali held various offices, which included supervision of taxes of Jews, the appointment of rabbis, even acted as a civil judge. And it said that the Sultan's respect for the rabbi was because he disguised as a civilian. Mehmed II was present one day while Rabbi Kapsali was rendering decisions and assured himself that the rabbi was incorruptible, let's just say, and impartial in his judgment. So he held him at a great state in of itself. So I think when the Sultan undertook to improve, let's say, the conditions, parts of Constantinople, it was said that his endeavor was prompted by the rabbi. And Rabbi Kapsali dealt very severely with Jewish youths, let's say, who were intimate with Janissaries, or imitated them in leading un-Jewish and immoral lives, let's just say, in of itself. Rabbi Kapsali's associations with the Bayezid, the son of Mehmed II, were pleasant, let's just say, in of itself. And Bayezid's friendliness towards the Jews, which would become especially evident in the, let's say, the ready reception of the Spanish exiles fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, must be ascribed in no small measure to Rabbi Kapsali's influence. Now, I think he passed away around in 1495 in Istanbul. I was then succeeded by Rabbi Elijah Mizrahi as the next Chacham Bashi afterwards. That was. So let's speak a bit about Rabbi Elijah Mizrahi. He passed away in around 1526. He was born in 1455. He was a Talmudist, was a great posek, and an authority in Jewish law. He was also a mathematician and very well known for his Sefer HaMizrahi, a super commentary on Rashi's commentary, and was also known as the Re'em, let's just say, over there, and also known as Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, let's say, coinciding with the biblical name of an animal, the Re'em, respectively, over here. So he was actually born, I believe, in Constantinople, and he was a Romanoite Jew also. His family was local Greek-speaking, and not from the Spanish exile. He would study under another famous rabbi, Rabbi Elijah Halevi, and also under Rabbi Yehuda of Mintz, of Padua, if I'm not mistaken. he was distinguishing himself as a Talmudist, I believe, at that stage in time. He was, let's just say, he was a grand jurist when it came to Jewish law, halacha respectively, and was known as a powerhouse within regards to that. I believe also he, if I'm not mistaken, he was very, very good at astronomy, mathematics. I also he knew Byzantine, Greek and Arabic. He obviously would go on to succeed Rabbi Moses Kapseli after he passed away in 1495 as a Grand Rabbi of the Ottoman Empire. He held this position the rest of his life. And as Hacham Bashi was known for his, let's say, more mild attitude towards the Karaites, an attitude he would inherit from his Rabbi Elijah Halevi. He even held that it was permissible to teach them Talmud, apparently, the Gemara, respectively, over there. So that's another interesting tidbit within regards to him. Now, as we said before, he wrote the super commentary on Rashi's commentary of the Torah, and it was first published, I believe, in Venice in 1527. After Mizrahi, I believe, had passed away, I think it was done by his son, Rabbi Israel, wrote it. And he considered the commentary in Rashi the most important of his works, I believe, which is very, very interesting. The work shows Rashi's Talmudic, Midrashic sources, all obscure passages, let's just say, and was written partially to defend Rashi from scriptures of the later commentaries, particularly of Nachmanides. And I think there was compendium by another famous person, Rabbi Jacob Marsaria, was published under the title, I think, of the Kitzur Mizrahi, if I'm not mistaken. So that's another interesting thing to point out within regards to him. So that's very, very interesting over there. So he was a chief rabbi. He was a Hacham Bashi also of that specific area. And I think later by Isaac HaKohen of Austria, entitled the Matanet Ani. This was in Prague in 1604 to 1609. And several commentaries have been written on the Mizrahi itself, including the Yeriot Shlomo by Rabbi Solomon Luria, also known as the Maharshal, and the super commentary on Sefer Mizrahi by Rabbi Barzali ben Baruch Jabez, I believe, and structures in the work of Rabbi Samuel, I think Edels also respectively, which is very interesting. Now, what was the Chachbashi itself? Now, anyone tuning in live at the moment, please subscribe to our channel. We are nearing at the moment 8,000 subscribers. We've got fantastic content we're doing over here, and we're exploring the history of the Turkish Jewish community. Now, the Chacham Bashi in Turkish itself is a Turkish name for the chief rabbi of the nations of the Jewish community. And it was also used, let's say, for the chief rabbis of particular regions of the empire, such as in Syria, Iraq. And though the Chacham Bashi of Constantinople was considered overall the head of the Jewish people of their empire, and especially of Turkey, let's say respectively. Now, the introduction itself of the Chacham Bashi was established by Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, as we mentioned before, as part of the policy of governing, let's say, his exceedingly diverse subjects according, let's say, at that point in time, to their own laws and authorities wherever possible. Religion was considered as primordial aspect of a community of national identity. So the terms etnach had been applied to such religious leaders at that point in time. Because of the size and nature of the Ottoman state, containing a far greater part of the diaspora than any other, the position of Chacham Bashi was compared to that of the Jewish exilach also respectively. That's something we have to point out about the Chacham Bashi. Now, just going back to the Ottoman Empire as such, yes, it was, let's say, the closest thing to an overall exiliacal authority. I think office maintained considerable influence outside the Ottoman Empire, especially after forced migration of numerous Jewish communities and individuals out of Spain. Obviously, the fall of Granada in 1492. The chief rabbi is also, let's say, of the modern secular republic of Turkey, obviously known as the Chacham Bashi. Very interesting enough. And the official government appointed chief rabbi of other important cities in the Ottoman Empire, such as Damascus and Baghdad. The position of Chacham Bashi of Palestine terminated with appointment of separate Ashkenazic and Sephardic chief rabbis come at the year 1921 respectively. Okay, let's go back a bit and let's talk about the 17th and 18th century of the Jewish communities itself. Especially there was a decline of the Ottoman Empire. This decline gradually led to 16th century I think in amid the weakening of the political and economic, and also of the their status, there was a higher burdens of taxes on Jewish people of the Ottoman Empire, and there was a weakening of security also for the Jewish community over there. There was burning even at one stage of Jewish homes and businesses. Many Jewish people, I think, lost their lives. They were killed. And 17th century, the situation of Jews in Ottoman Empire worst. Obviously, we talked about Murad, I think the fourth of the Sultan, and many Jewish people at that point in time migrated, let's just say, at that point in time. And that was the time period, I think, of the Shabtai Tzvi also at that stage in time. So it was a changing moment, let's just say, in the world. Okay, let's now go speak more about famous, let's say, Turkish Jews, that specific era in of itself. We mentioned a bit about Daniel de Fonseca. He lived between 1672 to 1740. We spoke about him. He was a court physician, an advisor to notable European leaders. He was actually born in Portugal in 1672. And I think his father was famously Abraham da Fonseca, interesting enough, of Amsterdam. And he would, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was problems at the time to be Jewish. I think he moved to Istanbul in 1702, where Jews thrived under the tolerance of the Ottoman Sultanate. In Istanbul, he would begin to publicly embrace his Judaism. He married a woman named Esther Franco Mendes, and it was also during that time that de Fonseca exemplified himself as an excellent physician and was employed by several notable Ottoman aristocrats. Very interesting enough. And word of the young physician spread throughout Europe, especially in the Middle East. I think after the Battle of Poltava, de Fonseca, let's say, aided King Charles, I think, VII of Sweden in his intricacies, which he sustained during the Great Northern War. I believe this happened to have been at that point in time. And subsequently, after this prestigious position, he was appointed the physician to the French embassy in Istanbul. And he played an important role as an advisor to French diplomats regarding, let's say, Ottoman customs and culture. He held his office till 1719, when in March of that year he moved to Bucharest and would serve as a physician to Prince Nicholas Mavrocordates at that point in time. So you can see he was very, very well connected at that point in time to various people. I think it was during the Ottoman Habsburg Wars, de Fonseca expressed, let's say, his constant support of the Ottoman and French governments, and in return, the Austrian diplomat, someone named Ambrosios Franz, stated that de Fonseca was a shrewd integrier, let's just say, and much more can be said. So he was a famous person at that point in time. Another famous person was someone named Haim Farhi, someone we spoke about on various occasions before. In fact, he was also known as Haim el Mualim. He lived between 1760 to 1820. He was a Jewish advisor of governors of the Galil, especially in the days of the Ottoman Empire, and was assassinated in 1820, respectively. He was a chief advisor, financial vizier, and de facto ruler of Accra, respectively. He was a chief advisor to Jaza Pasha, an Ottoman government based in Accra, whose whims as included blinding Farhi and leaving him physically scarred. And Farhi, very, very interesting enough. Until his assassination in 1820, Haim Farhi was a financial vizier, and after the murder of Abdullah Pasha, they ordered Farhi's body cast. After his murder, Abdullah Pasha ordered Farhi's body cast into the sea and confiscated all his property. And two of Farhi's brothers, Suleiman and Raphael, who were living in Damascus at the time, organized a siege against Abdullah Pasha in Accra to exact revenge. Now, revered among the Jews, he was known as Chacham Haim, due to he had great Talmudic knowledge, and he hailed from a prominent family of traders and bankers in Damascus. He would bring protection, let's just say, to the Jewish community of Palestine, especially under those in Tiberias and Tzfat, who were under the jurisdiction of the governors of Sidon Eyalet, and they revered for his power and wealth. Both Jewish people, European and Christians, recounted tales of his wealth, let's just say, in of itself. Now, another key figure, especially in the Ottoman Empire and of Turkey, I believe, was someone of the name Yecheskel Gabay. He was in the 18th century. He was also known as the Baghdad Dali, if I'm not mistaken. He would actually come to a senior position in the Ottoman Empire I believe. And he was very influential, late 18th, early 19th century. In fact, he was born in Baghdad in the second half of the 18th century and had, like, say, a dynasty senior position in the Jewish community of Iraq, and would later on become, I think, a chief banker. He was close to many people in the Ottoman government at the end, and would have high positions, let's just say, in of itself. That he was another key figure, let's just say, at that stage in time. Okay, now let's go back a bit. Now we're going more towards 1660 to 1880. Over here, back in Istanbul, Turkey territory. Now we're going to speaking about Istanbul itself, respectively. Now, according to Ottoman documents from the 17th century, there were almost 40 Jewish communities in Istanbul. Wow. There was a great fire, unfortunately, in 1660, and the communities then were divided according to the origin of each one and separated between different branches. Even though there were some trends of integration and transition between them, separation, I believe, at that point in time would be, let's say, maintained, I think, for hundreds of years. There was an İminönü, I think, was the main location of the Jews in Istanbul. They lived in İminönü. Most of them happened to have been Roman Yotes. And in 24th of July, 1660, as mentioned before, a fire broke out in a shop to the west of İminönü, which spread all directions and burned entire neighborhoods. 2/3 of Istanbul were destroyed in the fire, it was reported over, and 40,000 people died in the 49 hours of the fire, sadly. The Ottoman authorities, headed by Valide Sultan, Hadis Turhan Sultan, used the fire as an opportunity to expel Jews from İminönü and complete the construction at that point in time of a mosque in the quarter. So you can see the anti-Semitism that happened all throughout the Jewish history. Most of the Jews moved and lived to the other side of the Golan Horn, Haskoy, I believe it was called, which had already been the center of Karaite Jews before, at the beginning of the 16th century. Let's say this transfer caused significant changes in the structure of the Jewish community. The old order of multiple independent communities was completely erased, and this phenomenon was common mostly among Roman Neotes, who were the biggest victims of the fire. Now, in comparison of Ottoman documents from 1623 to those from 1688, 1689, it seemed as though the amount of Romanite taxpayers remained the same at that stage in time, while the Sephardic population would double, I believe, at that point in time. According to different estimates, the number of Jews at the end of the 17th century was roughly 25 to 30,000, about a tenth of the city's inhabitants. And until the end of the 18th century, the population would then at that stage become relatively stable and maybe increase even a tiny bit, up to 40,000 Jews. In the 18th century, the Ottoman Jews of Istanbul would have economic disadvantages because of growing economic competition with European-backed Christians at that point in time. So that will be a challenge. Let's say they were able to compete unfairly through a series of special advantages into them through capitalizations of the Ottoman Empire. For instance, there were French settlers in the city, and they got many economic rights, protected by foreign ambassadors, and benefited preferential tax rates. Despite economic decline of the local community, local Jews, I believe, still were in prominent positions. By 1800, Ottoman Jews would make up about 5% of the city and 27% of all licensed physicians in Istanbul. In the 1700s, let's say, using the printing press, books came to be published in Spanish and Ladino, respectively. So now let's explore more about some of the rabbis from the Ottoman countries in of itself. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break for half a minute, and we're going to continue in half a minute now, friends. Wait, during this time here at the break, if you're new on the channel, please subscribe. I'll be back in 1 minute, okay? And we're going to explore some of the rabbis from that period also.
So that was different. So why did you now it's finding if you look at your store
Okay, shalom everyone. We're going to continue at the moment over here, and we're speaking about the history of Turkey, the Jewish community of Turkey over here. Let's start now to speak about some of the rabbis now for a period of time over here in special edition. Welcome to everyone to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. Okay, one of the rabbis I wanted to speak about that was very prominent in Turkey was a famous rabbi named Rabbi Avram ben David Yitzchaki. He lived between 1661 till 1729. Now he was a Rishon LeZion, a chief rabbi over here of Jerusalem, a very prominent position between 1715 and 1722, and he was also the author of the book called the Zera Abraham, respectively. He was he was born, I think, in 1661. He passed away in Jerusalem. He was actually I believe, a Talmud of Rabbi Moshe Galanti Asheni and Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Chagiz, I think. And he would have a great student also called Rabbi Moshe Yisrael, if I'm not mistaken. And he was at a time period between, in his generation of Rabbi Raphael Shlomo Havdalah. Now, what's interesting about him, Rabbi Avram Rigio, Rabbi Benjamin HaKohen Mali will be sandwiched between him as the Rishon LeZion. So who was he? He was born in 1661 in Jerusalem. His father was Rabbi David Yitzchaki, who was also a chief rabbi, if I'm not mistaken, of Jerusalem. And his grandfather, through his mother's side, was Rabbi Avram Azilei, another great rabbi who learned in famous yeshiva Bet Yaakov in Jerusalem, I believe. And he was also, as I said before, a Talmud of Rabbi Moshe Galante, Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Chagiz, and we learn Kabbalah under, I believe, at one stage in time, under great rabbis also, if I'm not mistaken. And he would, the Rosh Yeshiva in Jerusalem, and would have many great Talmudim, including Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Rappaport, Rabbi Moshe Chagiz, Rabbi Yitzchak Zarachia Azulei, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Mizrahi, Rabbi Moshe Yisrael. And I think in 1709, he would take on various different important positions. I think he would become a Shluchei D'Rabbanan, let's just say over here, a Yeshadar, as they say, rabbinic emissary. He would actually spend time in Turkey, in Italy, and in the Netherlands also. He was against Nehemiah Chayun, who was a Sabbatean at that point in time. And he would do various important works in Izmir. I think in Izmir, in the year Taf Ayin, Av Shechanea et Hakila, Hamakomot Lesrof et Sfirot Shel Ha-Shabta'im, Velo Ukia, I think at that point in time. So take on important roles at the point in time. He was really against the Sabbatean movement, and was, I think, spent time in Thessaloniki also, and take on various different important positions. And he would return after being in Turkey for a strong period of time. He would also go to Amsterdam, and then he would learn, when he came back to Jerusalem, among great student Talmudim, including Rabbi Moshe Chagiz, Rabbi Yitzchak Zerachi Ali Azulei, who was a father actually of the Chidah, interesting enough. And he would write various books and important works, and become the Rishon LeZion between 1715 and 1722. And I think he was actually passed away in 1729 and was buried in Har HaZeitim, also respectively. Now, another key rabbi who became a big rabbi also in Turkey was a rabbi named Rabbi Eliezer Nachum. He lived between 1662 to 1744. He was the head of Jewish courts, and especially in Rosh Yeshiva in Adrianpol in Turkey. He would spend a few years after making Aliyah to Israel, and become also a Rishon LeZion, a chief rabbi until he passed away. He was actually 82 years of age when he passed away, and he wrote great books, including Otiot Eliezer, the Chazon Nachum V'od. His rabbi was Rabbi Yaakov Streimer, if I'm not mistaken, and his Talmidim included the Chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulay, Rabbi Benjamin Kazis, Rabbi Shlomo Shalom, Rabbi Avram Ben Avigdor. So he was the sixth Rishon LeZion between Rabbi Benjamin HaKohen Mali and Rabbi Nissim Chaim Moshe Mizrahi. Also, let's explore. So he was actually born in Istanbul. His father was famous Rabbi Yaakov Nachum, and while he was young, he would learn, as I said before, under Rabbi Yaakov Streimer, and he would. I think, in of itself, will go on to become great. He would work, I believe, as the head of Jewish court, and also Rosh Hashiva in Adrianople in Turkey. And he would go around various different places. He would establish a great yeshiva gedolah over there, and really bring about a huge amount of kiruv and Torah work itself, respectively, over there. And I think he got married. V'nasali isha et almanotah, Rabbi Rafael Kara reports also. And while he was in Turkey, I think he was in correspondence with a Jewish congregation in Tzfat, and would work as a shluchei d'Rabbanan also, and take on various different important positions. He would eventually make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael at the end, eventually become a chief rabbi, a Rishon LeZion at that point in time. And he was eventually buried in Har Zeitim. He wrote Chazon Nachum, which is a Perush in Mishnah, the Otiot Eliezer, which is another great book, the Milvad Olot, also a Perush on the Sefer Ha'itur, the Mishnat Rabbi Eliezer, Midrash Eliezer, and very, very great books. I think it was in different volumes. Now, another key rabbi in Turkey was someone named Rabbi Yitzhak HaKohen Rappaport. Now, interesting enough, he will also become a Rishon LeZion, a chief rabbi of Israel. And he was an 18th century rabbi who lived in the Ottoman Empire. He actually died in Jerusalem. And he was a pupil of Rabbi Hezkiah de Silva, known as Pri Hadash. It's interesting, he journeyed through Europe in behalf of the Haluka Fund, I believe, and he was elected the rabbi of Smyrna, and he remained there for 40 years, so he's a key rabbi in Turkish history. And he returned to Jerusalem and became a chief rabbi at that point in time, which is interesting because he was, I think, the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel, or of Ashkenazic descent. He was the author of the Batei Kahuna, and the first part of this book, let's just say, contains responsa and treatise on the poskim of Smyrna, especially, and very, very interesting. I think he passed away in 1755, if I'm not mistaken. He would go on to become the Rishon LeZion between 1749 to 1755, and I think was followed by Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi, if I'm not mistaken, over there. So what's interesting, he was actually born in Lublin in Poland, and very interesting. I think his maternal grandfather was Rabbi David HaKohen Rappaport, if I'm not mistaken. And he would also work, I think, in the court of Rabbi Moshe Galanti, if I'm not mistaken. Now, despite he was actually of Ashkenazic origin, he would still make it as a chief rabbi of Israel over there at that point in time, which was, I think, the first of that point in time, which is very, very interesting. So that's something we should point out about him. He really grew up among the knees of the great Sephardic sages, especially the Pri Hadash, Rabbi Hezkiah de Silva, and we learn in the famous Beit Yaakov Yeshiva, I believe. And there were great prominent rabbis over there, including Rabbi Shlomo El-Ghazi, and they would become close friends and very much correspond at that point in time. After the passing of the Pri Hadash, I think there was other great rabbis there. Another great rabbi there was Rabbi Yosef Konki, if I'm not mistaken, another famous rabbi. And I think he would work as a shluchei d'Rabbanan. He was working in Constantinople. He would be corresponding with the famous Rabbi Alfandari also on various different aspects of Jewish law at that point in time. And I think they were very much against Rabbi Nehemiah Hayon, and writing letters of boycotts against him at that point in time. He would move to Izmir later on, I think in the 1710s, and the people would expect him as a rabbi over there, and he would found a yeshiva there and was working there for about 35 years over there. And they had many great students, including Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra. was a great Torah author, and eventually become Rishon LeZion, chief rabbi in Israel. So that's a key rabbi who really made their mark in Turkey. Now, another rabbi who we want to speak about over here is Rabbi Chaim Raphael ben Asher, another great rabbi of his time, another Rishon LeZion, chief rabbi. So now we're speaking over here about, at this stage in time, we're speaking about the various different chief rabbis that were in Jerusalem and made their mark, let's just say, in Turkey respectively. So Rabbi Chaim Avraham Raphael ben Asher, he lived between 1714 to 1772. He was also a Kabbalist. He was a Rosh Hashiva in Jerusalem, and he was a chief rabbi in Jerusalem also. He was the 11th chief rabbi between the years 1771 and 1772, between Rabbi Raphael Miyuchas and Rabbi Moshe Bola, respectively. So I think he was very, very famous. I think as of the year 1734, he went out to Shluchei Rabbanan all over Europe from Jerusalem, and that would actually make him very well acquainted, especially he was working in Izmir in Turkey, and also in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. And he would start up, I think, the Yifa'el and Avim, I think, in Jerusalem also at that point in time. And he was close. He was appointed the head of Jewish court under Rishon LeZion Rabbi Eliezer Nachum, also very, very great rabbi. I'll take on various different important roles. I think he was connected to the famous Yeshivat Bet El at that point in time, and was very close to the rabbis of Jerusalem also. And he would take on importances in Turkey. Eventually, he would get rewarded and become the chief rabbi, Rishon LeZion, in 1771. But he passed away, I believe. I think there was a plague in Jerusalem, I think around 1772, and he died on the 16th of August, 1772. Very interesting enough. So he was buried in Har Zeitim, the Mount of Olives burial plot, respectively. Now, another key rabbi that will make his mark in Turkey was a famous Rabbi Yom Tov Al-Ghazi, also known as the Maharit Al-Ghazi. I think he passed away in 1782, but he was born in Izmir in 1727. He was a son of Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi, who was an Ottoman rabbi who studied under Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, the Rashash HaKadosh, who was also the Rosh Hashiva of Yeshivat Bet El. He actually succeeded Rabbi Sharabi as the head of Yeshivat Bet El and as a chief rabbi of Jerusalem and the rest of the country from 1773. I think it was after his father-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Bola, passed away shortly after being appointed in 1772. Now, until his death in 1782, respectively, he would travel to Europe, solicit funds for Jerusalem, and was very close to various Hungarian rabbis, Rabbi Moses Sofer, and Rabbi Akiva. He would visit France, if I'm not mistaken. Most famously, when rumors spread that the Jews of Jerusalem were planning to aid Napoleon's conquest of the city, Rabbi Al-Ghazi publicly declared loyalty to the Turks and gathered community to offer prayers and Ottoman victory at the Kotel, the western wall, respectively. That's something we have to point out. He was very close to Rabbi Mordechai Miyuchas, and they organized, let's say, a Jewish contingent to reinforce, I believe, the city's defenses. Now, he had great published works, including the Shemot Yom Tov and the Hilchot Yom Tov and the Kedushat Yom Tov, the latter being printed in 1843. Very interesting enough. So, that's very, very important. I think he was actually born in Izmir, according to one opinion over here. He was born in Izmir in 1727, and seemingly maybe passed away in 1802, actually. Interesting enough. His father, as we said before, was Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Al-Ghazi, and including among his rabbis was Rabbi Yonah Yavon, and obviously Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, also recited. So according to another source, he died in 1802. Now, his rabbi, Rabbi Yonah Navon, was another key rabbi in Turkey itself. He lived between 1713 till 1760. He was one of the great Talmidim. He was a rabbi in Turkey. He was a rabbi in Jerusalem, a Talmid Chacham in Jerusalem, the Shluchei Rabbanan. And I think he was author of the Nechpa B'Kesev. And he was a rabbi of the Chidah, interesting enough also. Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azileh, who mentioned back before, over here. So that's very, very interesting. And he was a Talmid of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Mizrach, who was another great rabbi. He actually lived at the time period of the famous Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, Rabbi Shem Tov Gabbai, Rabbi Yitzhak Kohen Ravabot. And he was born in Jerusalem, as before. His father was Rabbi Hanan Navon, And I think when he was 9 years of age, sadly, his father passed away. What he would learn young in the famous Yeshivat Beit Yaakov Pereira, among Rabbi Yisrael Meir Mizrahi, over there, the author of the Pri Ha'etz. And he'll be appointed, I think, as one of the Chachamim of the yeshiva of the Yifa'er Anavim, if I'm not mistaken. He would establish, I think, along with Rabbi Chaim Ibn Natzar, the Knesset Yisrael Yeshiva over there, and he would learn there. He would have a prominent position there in of itself, especially when he was 33 years of age. And then afterwards, he would become the head of the Gedulot Mordechai, along with Rabbi Shem Tov Gabbai, I believe, this Talmudic place. He was sent as a Shochet Rabbanan to Turkey, to Greece, to Egypt, also to Algeria, to Tunisia, and various different places in of itself. Published many of his works at that point in time. I was very close to other great rabbis, including the Chidah, Rabbi Yom Tov El-Ghazi, if I'm not mistaken. And what's interesting is he was appointed a Dayan in the Beit Din of the Rishon LeZion, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Rappaport, I think at one stage in time also. He passed away actually, I believe, on the 16th of Shvat, and he was only 47 years of age. He was actually buried in Jerusalem. So he was another famous rabbi of his time. Now let's speak about Rabbi Yaakov Kuli over here. Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, another great Turkish rabbi. He was the author of the book, the Me'am Loez. I think that was, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli actually passed away in 1730. And it was a Judeo-Spanish great Torah book on the Torah, respectively. And possibly best known as a publication in that specific language, respectively, over there. So Rabbi Yaakov Kuli was also a Talmudist. Especially, he died, I think, varying opinions, either in 1730 or 1732. He died in Constantinople in Turkey, respectively. So I'm not too sure the date of his birth, but I think he died, he was quite young, relatively. Now, he belonged to an exiled Spanish family and was a grandson of famous Rabbi Moshe ibn Habib. He edited various important works. I think much of his literacy activity was a publication of his grandfather's writings. And he left Sfat, where he seemed like, I think he lived at a window of time in Sfat also, and relocated to Constantinople. He would engage in the works of his grandfather. In 1714, he had close relations with the famous chief rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis, also known as Mishnah Melech, over there at that point in time, and was, let's say, regarded as the highest authority of the Orient. I think Rabbi Rosanis appointed Rabbi Kuli as a Dayan, as a judge, which together with his position as a teacher, they would secure to him a sufficient livelihood. And I think come on 1727, Rabbi Kuli published his grandfather's work, the Shamot Ba'aretz, which is various different notes, as say, of various portions of the Gemara, respectively, over there. It's very, very interesting. I think in that year, Rabbi Rosanis passed away and left, let's say, voluminous literary remains. Let's say it was a more, let's say, troublesome condition. Let's say these works to introduce order into this workings in of itself as a scholar of the first rank was needed. So Rabbi Kuli was entrusted with the task, but even for him it meant much work for several years. First in 1788 he edited Rabbi Rosanis's book, the Parshat Derachim, I believe, a work on both midrashic and halachic consent, and a few years later published Rabbi Rosanis's voluminous Mishnah Melech and the most famous commentaries on Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, I believe. To both of these, Rabbi Kuli would write a preface. And in the same year, he edited also his grandfather's Ezrat Nashim book, also respectively. And two responses of, I think, his own is also featured there. But obviously, his most important commentary would be the Ma'am Loez, which was written in Saloniki, and it was held in high regard by the Jews of the East. It was obviously an encyclopedic commentary in Ladino at that stage in time. It dealt with Jewish life in all its relations. That's something that we have to point out within regards to this great Torah colossal work in of itself. So, that's very, very interesting. And so this book itself, I'd recommend everyone to learn it respectively. I would very, very much recommend. But I think he only managed to write his book on Bereshit and on 2/3 of Shemot, Exodus, before he passed away. Because of the popularity of the Mamluks, other great rabbis of Turkey would go on to write more volumes. And Rabbi Kuli also wrote a work I believe, under the Simonim Le'oraita, which remained, I believe, in manuscript, if I'm not mistaken. So that's another interesting thing. Yes, Rabbi Cooley, yes, so that's very interesting. What's interesting, I think a later stage after the book, after he passed away, the book will be continued. Rabbi Yitzhak Mar Griso will complete the Shemot book, and Vayikra Bamidbar Dvarim was done by Rabbi Yitzhak Bachor Agirioti, I believe, and the commentary on Joshua was written by Rabbi Rachmim Menachem Mitrani, and the book of Esther was written by Rabbi Raphael Echia Pontremoli, and Rabbi Shmuel Yerushalmi translated the works into Hebrew, and it was greatly deviated from the origins of the, let's say, the Navi commentaries, respectively. He also continued the Mamlu's work in Hebrew, and many of the books of the Tanakh, the Nach, that the sages were in, did not write. Yeah. Let's speak a bit about Rabbi Raphael Chia Pontremeli. He was author of the Mamlu's on the book of Megillat Esther, and he was the editor of Simcha Lelish, I believe, by Rabbi Shmuel Shunshal. He was also born in Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, and the family itself of Rabbi Pontremeli actually came from Italy, if I'm not mistaken. Now, another famous rabbi in Turkey of that time, we're going back a bit, really in the 17th century, was Rabbi Chaim ben Avisi between 1603 to 1673. He was a public, let's say a prominent rabbinical authority of the 17th century. He was a Talmid of Rabbi Yosef Trani and a brother of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Avisi. He was once again born in Constantinople. He was appointed by Rabbi of Taita, a town near Izmir, he would be, between 1640 to 1658. He was appointed as one of the rabbis of Izmir, and it's reported he was initially a follower of the Shabtai Tzvi, but later on renounced him unequivocally, I believe. Also, he wrote great works, including the Shurei Knesset HaGedolah, the Knesset HaGedolah, which is halachic commentaries on the Arba Turim and the Code of Jewish Law also. And these two commentaries obviously are characterized by extensive analysis of halachic sources from mid-16th century to the mid-17th century. I think the Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulay, the Chida, recommends the commentaries be consulted prior to rendering any halachic decision. He also compiled the 2-volume question and response, the Baye Chaye, which covered the 4 sections on the Code of Jewish Law. Now, his brother, I believe, was Rabbi Joshua ben Israel ben Avisi, also another famous rabbi, lived between 1590 to 1668. He was a great Jewish physician, and the rabbi also of Constantinople. He was brother of Chaim ben Avisi, Rav Chaim ben Avisi, and a Talmid of Rabbi Joseph Trani also. His works included sermons and a commentary on the Jerusalem Talmud, a treatise on the high holiday prayer service, and a study of Jewish divorce laws, I believe also. Despite, let's say, his significant contributions, many of his works remain, I think, in manuscript form also. And so both Rav Joshua and Rav Chaim ben Avisi would study under Rabbi Joseph Trani. Now, Rabbi Joseph ben Avisi was recognized for great extensive contributions to Jewish practice and scholarship. He prepared the Mishmeret HaMitzvot, Observance of Commandments book, a metrical version of the Asharot. I think the Lebush Malchut, also a royal garment book, a hymn in the style of Gabriel's royal crown, I believe. Rabbi Azli actually claims to have seen both of these writings in manuscript at the house of the rabbi in Constantinople, respectively. The Rabbi ben Avisi authored thousands of responsa. Much of it was lost in the fire, and much of it was published in Hungary, I think more towards the very early parts of the 1900s. Now, another famous rabbi in Turkey was Rabbi Yosef Samiga. I think he, if I'm not mistaken, he passed away in 1629. He was a rabbi, he was a Rosh Yeshiva, a Kabbalist in Turkey. I think we spoke about him on various occasions before. His father was a great rabbi, Rabbi Benjamin Samaga from Salonika, respectively, a Rosh Yeshiva in Padua, if I'm not mistaken, also in Venice, respectively, over there. Rabbi Yosef Samiga was author of the Horeh, and was a great author. He printed, I think, some of his books, including Makrei Kodesh, which is in 2 sections, if I'm not mistaken. And his book was accepted by many people in Europe, respectively, over there. And the quotations are actually mentioned from Maharsha. And he was close to Rabbi Yitzhak Nonish Belemonti in his book, the Sha'ar HaMelech, and the second book, the Porat Yosef, interesting enough, which is on Mesechet Ketubot and Mesechet Chulin, and the halachot, the Jewish laws of the Rif, respectively, over there at that point in time. He was a rabbi of Rabbi Chaim Ben Abissi, the Knesset Gedolah, who we just mentioned, Rabbi Yosef Shlomo Taldigo, also, which is very, very interesting. And he was an author of great books, Mikrai Kodesh, I think, including the Perush Derech Yamin and Porat Yosef, and various other important work over there. So anyone that's tuning in live at the moment, welcome to our community, and please, everyone, if you're joining, please subscribe to the channel. At the moment we are nearing 8,000 subscribers, so please subscribe. We've got fantastic content here, as you can see, every day, and we're exploring now the history of the Turkish Jewish community. Now, another famous rabbi in Turkey, Rabbi Yitzhak Nonish Blemonti, lived between 1710 and 1774. He was author of the Sha'ar HaMelech. He was a rabbi in Izmir. He lived between 1710 and 1774. He was about 64 years of age when he passed away. He grew up in Izmir, I believe. He was close to Rabbi Chaim Abu Lafia, if I'm not mistaken, really great rabbi. And he would learn under Rabbi Berzeli Yavitz, another great rabbi. He was author of the Lashon Lomdim, and also he was close to Rabbi Yitzhak HaKohen Rappaport, who we mentioned about before. I think that just to mention about the big fire that was in Izmir also, it destroyed many of the synagogues over there, and he would eventually travel to Livorno in Italy, and over there would form a Beit Knesset, a synagogue over there, along with Rabbi Avram Leon, I believe, at that stage in time. He will write a book on the Shita Mekubetzet, on the Sechet Bava Batra also, and various other important books. And very, very important rabbi he was. Another great rabbi in Turkey was Rabbi Chaim Yehuda Eliezer, who passed away towards the end of the 18th century in 1789, in September 1789. He was a dayan, he was a judge, he was an educator, he was a halachic decider in Izmir, and a rabbi, a very prominent rabbi. He was actually buried, I believe, in Izmir, if I'm not mistaken. And he was author of the Simchat Yoda, if I'm not mistaken. He was once again a Talmid of Rabbi Yitzhak Nonis Blemonti, and he would have a great student himself, Rabbi Yitzhak Kotinio, I believe. It's interesting, his son was Rabbi Yeshua Avram Yehuda, another great rabbi of his time. He was, I think, a descendant of Rabbi Berzeli Yavitz, if I'm not mistaken, and a Chatan of Rabbi Yaakov al-Balali, respectively. So he was very, very well decorated within all of that. He learned actually Torah through auspices of Rabbi Rabbi Yitzhak Nonis Blemonti, and that was really seen as outstanding in of itself. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Chris Rabbi Raphael Ashkenazi also. He was the author of the Amid and had many great Talmudim in of itself, and many of the great rabbis would actually quote him and speak high of him. He would leave this great descendants, including Rabbi Yeshua Avram Yehuda, who was the author of the Avodat Moshe. His daughter was very, very interesting. So that's something to point out. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Neo, who we just mentioned before, I believe he passed away in 1800 in Izmir. He was Rabbi Chaim Pelagi, and we're going to speak about Rabbi Pelagi in the next session, Be'ezrat Hashem. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak didn't just have Rabbi Pelagi as a student. He had Rabbi Chaim Yehuda Eliezer and Rabbi Rachamim Aryeh Avram Ariyesh, respectively. His father was another famous rabbi, Rabbi Eliakim Getienio, if I'm not mistaken. So he was born in, Rabbi Eliakim Getienio was author of the two Fatzre'em and Agura Ba'alach, if I'm not mistaken. And very, very interesting. So much his rabbi, as was Rabbi Chaim Yehuda Eliezer, who was author of the Simchat Yoda. I think the Chabif actually mentions him respectively. Aduni Mori HaKadosh, Mori Harav, O Harav Beit Yisachek, V'ktamato Leseve Bechevrat B'chaim. כותב החביף שבילדתו היה לומד בכל שבוע את רש"י ומפרשיו על פרשה אצל הרב יצחק גוטינר, really complimenting him on the highest level, let's just say itself. Let's say something about his father, Rabbi Eliakim Gotiner, for a minute. He lived between 1725 to 1795. He was actually born in Izmir also. He was the Talmud of Rabbi Raphael Ashkenazi and Rabbi Moshe Amrielo, respectively. And his father was also another great rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Gatiner Rishon. So it was a really great rabbinic dynasty in of itself. So Rabbi Yitzchak Gatiner, I think, grew up in Torah under great rabbis, if I'm not mistaken, of that specific day. We spoke about the fire in Izmir, which led to devastation. And the Beit Knesset and Beit Midrash, I think, was burned down over there. And the family would actually have to move and relocate at a later stage of time. Obviously, a factor was where the Torah was in of itself. He would learn, I think, among his uncle, Rabbi Moshe Amrielo, who was a great rabbi, and really his name would spread, and would learn under Rabbi Yehuda Ashkenazi also, and would really become great imbued in Torah. And he would be appointed a Dayan together with Rabbi David Bachar Abulafia over there, so that's very prominent positions. Anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of the Turkish Jewish community over here. They're on this special series over here today. Let's speak about another great Turkish rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Ashkenazi, was a rabbi of Turkey. He lived between 1727 to 1761. He was only about 34, I believe, when he passed away. He was the Talmud, once again, of Rabbi Yitzchak Mayo and Rabbi Eliakim Getriano. And his son was Rabbi Raphael Ashkenazi, another famous rabbi. He was a rabbi of Izmir in Turkey. He was a Parshan and a great Talmudist also. And he had a great amount of books. He was actually born in Izmir. And when he was only 14 years of age already, he would have a prominent position, I believe, that at that point in time, overseeing many things and taking on important roles. As time went on, I think Rabbi Yehuda would actually get married, would marry his daughter, Nasar Rabbi Yehuda et bito shel Rabbo, Rabbi Brasilia Yavet. So obviously that would be interesting. Rabbi Brasilia Yavet, great rabbi. He was one of the great rabbis of Izmir, the author of Lashon Arumim and Lashon Lomdim, if I'm not mistaken. And he had great time with him also, including Rabbi Chaim Yehuda Eliezer, Rabbi Raphael Yitzchak Mayo, Rabbi Yom Tov Danon, I believe it was a Rishon LeZion also. His son, Rabbi Raphael Ashkenazi, we'll speak about in a minute, was author of Mare HaNoga, and he was appointed as a rabbi in the city. And his grandson would go on to become Rabbi Nisim Avram Ashkenazi. Rabbi Chaim Pelagi would really speak about him through the highest, just a compliment in of itself. That's important, as we've got to actually say over. Now, another key rabbi in Turkey, Rabbi Yitzchak Maya. He, I believe, he passed away in 1810. He was a rabbi. He was a Jewish halachic decider. He was the author of great Torah books. He was a rabbi of Izmir in his time and the author of important halachic works, including the Sharshei Yam. I think his Hilula is on the 21st of Elul, if I'm not mistaken. So he worked in Izmir, obviously part of the Ottoman Empire over this time period. So that's something to point out over there. Yeah, anyone joining in live, welcome to the community over here, and welcome to our community. And please feel free to join also the community. I think it was in 1725. I think he was actually born in Kushta at that point in time in Turkey. We learned under Rabbi Yehuda Ashkenazi. I think through Rabbi Yitzchak Nonish Monti, who was author of Shara Melech. I have great rabbinic teachers. And he'd be appointed in 1782 as a rabbi of Izmir and a deputy of the chief rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Mordai, respectively. And eventually, I think in 1793, he would make Aliyah to the land of Israel and take on an important role. So over there, he would work with Rabbi Raphael Yosef Chazan, who was the author of the Shut, the Chakrei Lev, and he would reach Turkey and take on various important positions over there also. So that's something. That is something to point out. Also very great. Another famous rabbi in Turkey, Rabbi Chaim Mordai. He lived between 1720 and 1794. He was one of the great rabbis in Tzfat. He was a rabbi of Izmir. He was a Dayan. He was also a Posek and a Shluchei Rabbanan, also respectively. He was 74 years of age. He passed away in 1794. You have to point out about him. Another great rabbi of Turkey in his time. And he was a student, obviously, of Rabbi Abulafia Hashemi. He was a rabbi, I believe, of Rabbi Chaim Shonshon, I believe. I lived at a time period of Rabbi Yechezkel Landau and Chida, respectively. So he was really at a time period of great rabbi. So he was actually, if I'm not mistaken, his father was Rabbi Eliyahu. He was born in 1720, I believe, in Istanbul, and was Talmid of Rabbi Chaim Abulafia, as we mentioned before. He would make Aliyah to Eretz Israel when he was 9 years of age, to Israel, and he would live in Tzfat for 25 years. I was considered one of the great rabbis over there at that point in time. I think come 1755 it was. He would actually return to Istanbul at that point in time and work as a Dayan. And I think there was an earthquake, I think around 1760. So at that point in time, he would actually travel as a Shukei de Rabbanan to raise funds for the people in Tzfat because they were in need. They were in need, I think, to rebuild at that point in time. And he would actually go to various places in Europe, I think even including in Prague. He would famously meet Rabbi Yechezkel Landau also, which is important, who he is author of the famous Noda Yehuda. And he was quite close to the Chida also, respectively. I think in 1776, he was the head, I think, appointed the head of the community of Izmir. And he would return to Tzfat just before he passed away, if I'm not mistaken. That's another key, interesting rabbi. Now, another rabbi we're going to speak about is the famous Rabbi Chaim ben Yaakov Abulafia, another key rabbi in Turkey. So who was he, Rabbi Abulafia? He was born in 1660 and he died in 1744 in Tiberias, Ottoman Syria. Was a rabbinical authority. He was a grandfather of Rabbi Chaim ben David Abulafia and the grandson of Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim ben Gamliel. Rabbi Abulafia was a rabbi in Smyrna, I believe also, which is a very, very prominent position of that specific point in time. We have to point out. So that's something to say about him. He was also, I think, instituted many takanot, regulations. And while he was 1740, at an older age, he restored the Jewish community in Tiberias. He was actually born in Hebron, I believe, and he passed away in Tiberias, as I mentioned before. And wrote different great works, which we'll talk about now. Included among his works includes the Mikra Kodesh, I think in 1729 it was printed in Smyrna, contained the biblical and Talmudic treaty themes. The Yosek Lekach between 1730 and 1732, once again printed in Smyrna, 3 volumes of the Torah itself. The Yashresh Yaakov was in 1729 also, and the Shavut Yaakov in 1733. A commentary, let's say, on Haggadic compilations of the Ein Yaakov and Rabbi Yaakov ibn Habib also, respectively. So that's something we've got to point out with regards to his brilliance. I think more can be said. I think he was close to other rabbis over there. He would help with regards to Tiberias. He would visit the city, which was ruined and deserted for many decades. I really saw the value of the land. And among his students include Rabbi Chaim Modai, I believe, over there. And he was taking on various different important roles. And he would respond to the requests of the community and would actually head the Jewish community of Turkey. To head there for, I think, a significant period of time to be the rabbi of Turkey, and earned great respect among even the Muslim residents over there at that point in time, especially Rabbi Moshe Yerushalmi, who was, let's say, a younger contemporary at that stage in time, and would really help within regards to the renewal of the Jewish settlements in Tiberias. Now, another famous rabbi, Rabbi Avram Amigo, who lived between 1610 and 1683. He was a great Sephardi rabbi. He lived in Palestine, I believe, and was contemporary of Rabbi Moses ben Nisim ben Avisti. Very interesting enough. So he was born in Adrianople in Turkey in 1610. So he's another key figure. He immigrated, I think, to the region in 1655 and of Israel, and would settle in Jerusalem. Became friends with another famous rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaim Zema. And Rabbi Amigo was highly respected by his contemporaries. He wrote the Pri Chadash, which was a great book, a commentary on the subdivision of the Orach Chaim, respectively, of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, from the laws of Passover to the end. The work, I think, was lost, if I'm not mistaken, but was also the work of a larger work, respectively. His halachic knowledge, Talmudic knowledge was brilliant and being very much noticed by the famous Chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef Kaveh. That's just some of the rabbis. And there's a lot more rabbis we could speak about. I tried to get some of the main rabbis, but there are more, much more. We're going to speak about more rabbis in the next part. Let's speak a bit about the early synagogues, pre-1800. Includes Ahridi Synagogue of Istanbul, which is, I think, located on the Ivanasri of the Mahallesi in Balat, part of a once thriving Jewish quarter of the city in faith in Istanbul, the province of Turkey. It was completed, I believe, back all the way in 1430, if I'm not mistaken, and it's one of the oldest synagogues in the city, if I'm not mistaken. It's actually built by Roman Yotes. These are Greek Jews in what then was Ottoman Empire and is now the North Macedonia, and very interesting. I think an organization in Neve Shalom would actually move to Constantinople more than 550 years ago. Just pointed out, they arrived in the Ottoman Empire from Iberian Peninsula, obviously at the time period of 1492, we have to point out. There's also a famous Jewish museum, I think, featured from many years ago, with full of manuscripts and so on and so forth. It's called the Jewish Museum of Turkey. It's a cultural center also, established with a quintessential foundation to inform the society of traditions and history of Turkish Jews. If I am not mistaken, I think, it was founded, I think, by the prominent Kamkli family who we mentioned about before. And I think the museum synagogue was previously known as a Zulfari synagogue and was restored and remodeled to suit a museum, I believe. In 1671, its foundation suggests that another structure was built. And during, let's say, the more colonial times, at that stage in time, so that's something to point out. And so it was a colony of Republic of Genoa, if I'm not mistaken, and was recorded in the Holy Synagogue Synagogue in Galata, also respectively. So that's something to point out. Within regards to that, another famous synagogue, which dates way back, is the Signora Giveret Synagogue, or the La Signora, if I'm not mistaken. This is, I think, located at Kemeralty, if I'm not mistaken, known as the Khabra Sokak Synagogue Street in the city of Izmir province of Turkey. The synagogue dates all the way back to the 16th century, and it's still in use today, if I'm not mistaken. It would later on damaged in a fire in 1841, but restored by the Roshalmi family. And new construction also used Italian architectural style. It's interesting. I think that this Giveret synagogue has a big yard, the Signora does, surrounded by massive high walls that block the view from the outside. There are add-on structures in the yards that are referred to as a Bet Midas, let's just say Salon and the Al-Ghazi synagogues. On Habra Street, there's neighboring buildings, and the synagogue is located in, I think, an area called Kemeralty, a historic, I think, bazaar of Izmir, forming a network of small shop stores. Let's say, and narrow streets which respond the Gra, which surround the Gra, if I'm not mistaken. Another famous synagogue is the Sardis synagogue. It's an ancient Jewish synagogue, let's just say, that was discovered in modern-day town of Sardis in Manisa province and western part of Turkey in itself. I think the former synagogue now is used as an archaeological site and a Jewish museum. And this archaeological site is the largest Jewish and known from antiquity, respectively. That's something we have to point out over there. I think it was Sardis itself is a name under foreign rulers, if I'm not mistaken, until its incorporation in the Roman Republic. I think it was in 133 before Common Era. The city served then as the administrative center of the Roman province of Lydia. Sardis was reconstructed after the earthquake in 17 Common Era. It's believed to have gained its Jewish community in the 3rd century, and it was when, let's say, the Seleucid king Antiochus III encouraged Jews from various countries, including Babylonia, to move to Sardis at that point in time. As said before, the historian Josephus wrote of a decree from Lucius Antonius, a Roman procurator of 50 to 49 before Common Era. Lucius Antonius to the Sardian people sends greetings. Those people who are fellow, let's just say, I believe the word that we here to use is critics or cultures of Rome, came to me and showed that they had an assembly on their own according to their ancestral laws. Basically, so that's very interesting. So Friends, these are just a few tidbits. We're going to probably do another 2 parts because there's so much to say within regards to the history of Turkish Jewry over here. And we've already recorded about approximately 25 videos of great rabbis of yesteryear. So if you notice, I record a lot here in different places at the moment. So very, very important. As we will, yeah. So we'll just walk for a minute to that and let's lead some concluding thoughts within regards to the country itself and within regards to Turkey, just the importances within regards to it, so what's actually going on and the great heritage of the site. I can't wait. I'm actually very, very excited about recording the part 2 video. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to do that in due course. Hopefully, I'm hoping we can record it maybe tomorrow or another point this week, and there'll be part 3 also, where we'll explore more than 19th to 20th century and modern day Turkey, and explore more that actually occurred in that time period. Some of it was overflowing in of itself, but I knew this first part is going to take a long time here. So if you're new to the channel at the moment, first thing I'm asking from you fantastic people out there is please subscribe to the channel and join our ever-growing community at the moment. So we're really going from strength to strength. That's something I have to point out now. We're a community here. We are learning about the countries of yesteryear, the Jewish communities. So if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. At the moment, we're nearing 8,000 subscribers, which is a phenomenal achievement. Now, on this channel, we also record videos about great rabbis of yesteryear, biography videos. So many of the rabbis we spoke about in today's video of Turkey, we've mentioned on previous occasions before. We have to point out, so you can check out their biography videos, especially in the stories of Tzaddikim section here inside the channel. We also record a daily tidbit on the Talmud, also to really powerade our day, to inspire ourselves. We have a great Jewish personality of current era, let's just say, itself, that gives some wisdom to all of Am Yisrael, imbues us with some Torah thoughts to really power boost the day itself. We also do tours all over Israel. We are touring, let's say, different archaeological areas. We go around Jerusalem, for example, and do good tours around the streets, which embody the names of so many of these great rabbis we're speaking about. That's another great project that we are working on at the moment, which is very, very good. And we like to do also various short clips also of different sites all over Israel. So many reasons to enjoy also. Bezrat Hashem will be recording, at the moment we record a video every single week on the Parshat Shavua. It happens to be Parshat Chayei Sarah this week. So watch your space. Hopefully today at one stage we're going to record also within regards to Shabbat Parshat Chayei Sarah, a nice cute idea within regards to that. And these Talmud videos that we've been doing at the moment here on this channel, we've been doing it since I think May 2022. We started Masechet Ketubot, so we've already recorded about 1,200 videos on the Talmud respectively. But we spoke about Turkey. In the next series, we're going to really speak about the time period of the famous Pelagi family. So watch your space within regards to that. Rabbi Chaim Pelagi, Rabbi Avram Pelagi, and some of the chief rabbis of that specific period of time, and really golden age, you could say, Turkish Jewry, where it was really, really at its peak and at its best at that stage in time. It happened to be. And now modern day, we know that Turkey now has only about 14,000 Jews. The community is much, much smaller, but especially after the Spanish Inquisition, it really grew tremendously, as we learned earlier on. And also we will explore about who's the current rabbis there, the current fabric of the Turkish Jewish community respectively. But Turkey and Israel were very much well connected. And one project that I'd love to work on also is the history of different cities of Israel, what actually went on with the great rabbis there, especially during the Ottoman time period, and look into proper detail about that specific time period in of itself, friends, over here. So that's very, very interesting. So I think I'm gonna make a move now. I was recording this from the city of Bet Shemesh, this video over here, and how important it is, and just enjoy Torah, spread Torah, share Torah to everyone else. So I think on this note, I'm going to wish you all well and a great day. And please, friends, everyone, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.